Welcome into episode 54 of The Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. I'm Ken Ray.
I'm Nicholas Raba.
And I'm Nicholas Tacek.
On a recent episode of The Checklist, we covered some really big hacks that affected maybe as many as 1 billion people. Today we're talking about one that's smaller in numbers, only 143 million people affected, and yet the ramifications could be bigger than any of those billion people hacks. If you watch local news, national news, or keep track of any blogs, you have no doubt heard about the Equifax hack. If you're like me, you hit the part where it said 143 million people and said, ooh, I wonder what's on TV. Sometimes numbers just get so big, it's hard to get our minds around. But we know a couple of security guys that we can talk to, and so we're going to try and do that today. So I guess the first question that I have is just, can you recap for me what exactly happened? Well, no, let's back up. Before we get to what happened with the Equifax hack, for people who don't know, who is Equifax?
Well, Equifax is one of three of the big credit, data providers in the United States. So if you have a loan or a credit card or have ever applied for any of those or pretty much use money in the United States other than cash, you're most likely in their system. They're kind of the people who give you the credit score that determines whether or not you are going to get that loan at a good interest rate or a sky-high interest rate. And so they have lots of data pretty much on every American with a credit history.
And so what they do, and this is not something, to be clear, and I know this is almost remedial sounding, but I just want to be 100%. This is not something that somebody goes out and signs up for. Like, I don't go to Equifax and say, hey, I want you to track this stuff for me. And there's a reason I'm being specific about this. I don't go to them and say, hey, will you track this stuff for me? It's just by virtue of the fact that I'm walking around sliding a piece of plastic every now and then. Equifax is out there gathering information about me specifically.
Exactly. All the credit card, all the financial institutions, they provide the data to the major companies out there, Equifax, Experian. So even if you have never visited Equifax.com, you have no clue who they are, your data is still being submitted to them.
In this case, you are not the customer of Equifax. You are the product. The big banks and the lenders are the customers. They go to Equifax or Experian or TransUnion to get the credit score, the credit history. If they're going to give you a loan, they want to check and make sure that you have good credit first. So you are not the customer. You are the product. Your data is the product. That's pretty much how it goes here.
And that seems sensible. I won't go so far as to say it seems fair. I won't even go so far as to say it seems right, but I will say it seems sensible. If I am going to go to a bank and apply for a loan, that bank is going to want something besides my, assurance that I'm good for that loan. At the same time, we don't actually know, generally speaking, how much information is being collected on us. Heck, we talk about that with Google. We talk about that with every website that we go to. We don't necessarily know how much information is being gathered on us. It comes into stark relief, though, when something like what's happened over the past few weeks happens. So what exactly happened with Equifax?
Well, they recently announced that from mid-May to the end of July, they had been hacked. Basically, 143 million Americans, their personal information was basically exposed to parties unknown at this time. And that's, it's not just your credit card number. If it was just your credit card number, you call the bank, not a big deal. They issue a new credit card.
To be clear, really quickly, credit card numbers were actually small in this. I want to say the number I read was only 209,000 credit card numbers. Not that that's nothing, but I think in terms of the kind of stuff that we've talked about, especially in the past few weeks, we would consider that a small hack.
Oh, very small. Yeah, the problem here was the non-credit card information, which would be people's names, people's birthdays, addresses, driver's license numbers, and the big one, Social Security numbers.
Yeah, that's good news. And again, this is, I hate to keep driving this home, but again, This is not information that any of us volunteered to this one big database. I mean, if we had gone there and given all this, sort of like that life hacker thing or whatever. Not life hack. What was it called?
LifeLock.
You know the one I'm talking. LifeLock. Thank you. Where the guy is like, yeah, you can just put your social security number up online and we'll totally protect you, which turned out not to be the case. Anybody who, sort of did that kind of went in eyes wide open. I mean, this is just, so here's this pile of information. This pile of information has now been accessed by ne'er-do-wells. Speaking of which, do we have any idea who it is that got this information?
Bad guys.
At this time, I don't think it's been attributed to anybody. They had a security company, unnamed security company, go in and help them kind of manage this crisis, but nobody's done any sort of attribution in this case. There were rumors that the data was for sale on the dark web late last week, and that was actually proven false over the weekend by some investigative journalists. So it's not that it's not on the dark web necessarily. We don't know right now. Mm-hmm. It will probably at least come out to some degree during all of the inevitable lawsuits and investigations from here on out. But at this time, we really don't know who has the data. But it's bad. It's bad no matter who has it.
So speaking of LifeLock and credit monitoring and things like that, that's going to be something to definitely look at.
How do you mean?
Actually utilizing.
Yeah.
Well, all of this data, all of your data, Ken, is your data on this website? Is your data exposed? Have you been party to this hack?
If you're asking me personally, I have not checked yet because that was another question I was going to ask. But I mean, and I don't want to get lost from the other points that we were making, but one of the things that Equifax is now suggesting is, go to this website, give us your name and the last 6 digits of your social security number, and we'll run that against, the accounts that we know were hacked or the accounts that we know were compromised, and then we'll tell you. And I'm thinking, so let me get this straight. You guys couldn't keep track of my information, but what you want me to do is come there and give you even more identifiable information that you can go, oh no, you're fine, or oh no, you're hosed. But I'm having to volunteer even more information at that point.
But they've already had that information, right?
Here's the best part, though. That site isn't even telling you whether or not your information was for sure in this breach.
I'm sorry?
The website is throwing back... Yeah, this is how bad this is. The website is throwing back different responses for legitimate information. People have been putting in fake information and getting responses back saying, oh, you've been, hacked. There have been people saying, oh, you're fine, when they check on their computer and they check on their phone responds back with the same data, mind you, says, oh, you were hacked. Half the time it's just saying, come back on, after September or something or other and sign up for our free credit monitoring. It's a joke right now. Not to mention the supposed terms and conditions on that website, which are saying if you enter your information and sign up for this credit monitoring, you're waiving your rights to class action lawsuits.
Well, what I had heard is if you sign up with that, so that particular website that you're talking about where you're supposed to go, theoretically supposed to go, although now I'm wondering if there's any point. But that particular website where you're supposed to go and check whether or not your information was accessed, the terms and conditions on that website are the one where you're basically saying you'll agree to arbitration, as opposed to being able to be part of a class action lawsuit. That's separate from Equifax, which again, if you've never done a deal personally with Equifax, it sounds like you would still be able to be part of a class action lawsuit. However, if you've ever signed up for any sort of service with them, in the terms and conditions that you didn't read, it says, just like the terms and conditions with my phone. I know like 10 years ago when I started with AT&T, there was something in there that said I can never sue AT&T for anything, that it has to be settled by arbitration. That's a fairly standard thing, which is kind of funny because we think, I could always sue. But no, you can't necessarily. But you're talking about 2 different sets of rules as far as the arbitration, class action lawsuit and all that, correct?
Yeah, I believe so. And, even with all this confusion right now as to whether or not somebody's information was in the database, in the breach, break down the numbers. I looked this up actually after the breach because I kind of wanted to know. Back in 2014, based off of census data and some information from the government in terms of average number of Americans with basically at least one credit card, the estimated number of Americans with a credit card, so thus credit history, was just about 170 million in 2014. So if we're saying 143 million people were part of this breach, let's just say you're most likely in it. I'm most likely in it. Everybody is most likely part of this data breach.
So where's the other handful of people? What database was that kept in?
Yeah, I know. Is there a special database for the high rollers?
I wondered, actually, are they the high rollers or the people who can't get credit? Right.
Yeah.
Ugh. All right, so here's another question. I'm thinking about the movies, like, where the bad guy is going to get all the gold in the world, or where the bad guy is going to get all the power in the world. And I've often wondered, well, if you had all the gold or all the power, what's the value in that to you as a bad guy? Because now there's nothing against which to trade it, right? If I've got all the gold, well, now I've got all the gold. So nobody else can do anything. So I guess I win, but the game's not over. You still live. I mean, if I've got all the power, but all I've ever wanted is power, I think you get what I'm saying. If I've got such a huge pile of something, does that not make that thing almost without value? Going the other way, 143 million people have now had their information accessed. I guess, first of all, even at $30 a pop, you can't possibly sell all of that. What good is all of this information to the hackers? And then, what good is any of our information going forward, since all of it could just be a joke, having been accessed and hacked and stolen and who knows what?
So why sell it all at once? Break it up.
Well,
nobody knows who did it right now, right?
Yeah.
I mean, nobody's saying who did the hack. So if data is just broken up, then maybe it's worth more. I mean, than dumped all at once.
And that's something with identity thieves that they've done in the past is when they steal, when they hack a website or they steal credit card numbers, they're going to do what they can to figure out which of those credit cards are high limit credit cards. And then those will be worth more than, somebody who has a low credit limit when they're selling the data. Since they're getting all of this information from one of the giant credit data providers here that tells the banks who is creditworthy for a loan, that data most likely was categorized or had some sort of indicator for who had good credit and who had bad credit, who had high credit limits because of all of that data. I mean, if you ever look at your credit report from Equifax or from Experian or for any of those companies, it shows all your open credit cards. It shows your current balances. It shows your limits. So just assume the bad guys have all of that data. They now know out of those 143 million, which people had the high limit credit cards, low balances, more of the prime targets for identity theft. You can, toss out all the people who have bad credit or low credit limit. The bad guys are going to go for the juicy targets there, make it worth their while the most. The fact that they were in the system for as long as they were without being detected as well, they got caught, or maybe I shouldn't say they got caught, but the intrusion was detected. So now the fun and games have stopped. But during that time period where they were running around without any security alerts in Equifax's systems for a month and a half, that's plenty of time to do a lot of damage to a lot of people's identities. And it kind of circles around to the fact that we're using social security numbers as that one number that ties all this stuff together, because that's not something that's easily replaceable like a credit card number is or anything else. And there's the arguments go back years as why are we using social security numbers as identifiers, because that's not what they're meant to do. But it's the reality of the situation, and this is going to have ramifications for quite some time.
So are they going to change that? Are we not going to rely on social security numbers? Like, we see credit cards enhanced with the whole chip and pin thing, but in the States, we're not even using pins for the chip and pin cards. I mean, what comes next? Or is this just going to be everybody's affected, so monitor your your credit, monitor everything, sign up for a free year of service with Equifax credit monitoring service. And then after a year comes up, then renew at this premium rate.
Exactly. I mean, after a year.
Yeah. Is this the biggest troll that ever existed?
Because that's the thing, is your social security number isn't suddenly going to become secure after a year of free credit monitoring. You know, if it's truly out there, and this is why this is going to be such a mess, is because we've never seen a data breach on this level where you're talking about the majority of American adults having their social security numbers out there.
We use the term data mining a lot of times, and the interesting thing about a mine is you can leave stuff sitting in a mine for a very long time. It's still valuable once you finally go in and get it. Mm-hmm. So you're right. Free credit report for a year just means they were patient. And they can afford to be patient because they've got 143 million people's information.
And tying back to what you said before, Ken, about is our data even worth anything at this point? I think that's kind of the big unknown here, because whenever we've seen any other data breaches where you're just talking about I guess should say more of the basics, your name, address, credit card number, you change your credit card number, you put a fraud alert on your account for a few months, you basically do what you can to hope you slide under the radar and that the banks are watching your back. But with social security numbers in the mix here, I mean, we use that as a form of identification in so many different areas as Americans. And that's really going to be the question here, is if they can figure out who has the data, what are they going to do about the social security number thing? I mean, especially if that data ends up public.
So Equifax, on the footer of their homepage, their trademark, powering the world with knowledge.
Wow.
In fairness, they didn't say who, so I guess that could just be everybody. You mentioned we don't know who has the data. Let's go back to that question again. And I know we don't know, like, specifically. We can't say, okay, nobody's claimed responsibility or we haven't traced it back to whomever. I guess the one thing I do wonder is, do we even have an idea of the type of person that might have done this? I'm thinking from shows that we've done in the past, this is just somebody who found a trove of information that they knew they were going to be able to bundle and sell to someone else. I mean, chances are this is not somebody who said, I will be able to take this, I will be able to skim this information, I will be able to do this to these specific people, and I will be wealthy. Chances are these are people who said, holy cow, 143 million, I can divide that up 8 ways to Sunday and sell it 1 million times to 1 million different people. I mean, do you think we're talking about just not just an information broker, but somebody who likes to sell information nefariously? Or might we actually be talking about somebody who's now going to go on some, mad financial spree?
You don't think it was just some disgruntled guy who couldn't get a good interest rate or got declined for a loan, who started poking around their system and then figured it all out?
See, I love that idea. That's like origin of a supervillain. I'd be okay with that, because then, then we just wait for Superman to come by and beat him up.
Here's the thing. This is all going to be hypotheticals because we honestly don't know. But
right.
Here are the things I've seen bouncing around in the security circles online. And let me preface this with one thing. When we see that number, 143 million, when it comes to breaches of personal information, so you're talking credit card breaches, or if a hospital gets hacked and patient records get out, what legally they have to do to cover their bases as far as insurance claims and everything else goes is they have to determine the maximum number of people who could have been affected by that breach. Not necessarily that all those records were accessed. Okay. But if the bad guys could, with this thing that say somebody figured out a way to hack a hospital provider's website. This actually happened recently with one of the insurance providers, I believe. Somebody figured out a way that they could just change numbers in the URL and they could suddenly access other patients' information. And this person was a white hat security researcher. They reported it to the company. They only accessed their own record and their friend's record, something like that, where it was a really limited number. But legally, the lawyers have to say, okay, well, how many of our patient records could have been accessed using the same method? And then you have a large number that could have been. Now, I don't want to downplay this situation because there's a good chance that the data really is out there for 143 million people. But there's also a chance that maybe the number that was actually accessed was much smaller, but the bad guys could have accessed up to 143 million with the same whatever they did to get the data. So that's just something to preface this with. As far as attackers or motivations go, I've seen a few different things. There's obviously the typical identity thieves or data brokers that people have been bandying about. Was this a web flaw? Was this a 0-day? How did they get in? Nobody's got the answers right now, aside from Equifax possibly. I saw one theory that it was a foreign country that has in the past tried to enumerate, information on Americans, just to kind of get an idea of the overall citizens and the financial standings, and basically for whatever use they're going to use that for, just to know more about us as a country. I don't know that I've seen any real consensus. And since we haven't seen any sort of official report or post-mortem from whatever company they hired to do the security analysis here, until that comes out, I don't think we'll know for sure. But the chances that it's just, with some white hat hacker who discovered this flaw and reported out of the goodness of their heart, that is pretty much slim to none at this point. You wouldn't do an announcement the way they did, were it something small that they could, say, oh, they found the security flaw and swept it under the carpet. That's probably not the case here.
I'm right in thinking, too, that a white hat hacker would actually, part of being a white hat is to then go out and say, holy crow, look what I found.
That's the other weird thing here, is that nobody has claimed responsibility. And that is, with some of the smaller hacker groups out there, that are more for making a name for themselves, they would be much more prone to saying, hey, yeah, that was us, we did it, and so what, and we're causing chaos. The fact that nobody's tried to claim responsibility here, and the fact that we really haven't, as far as I'm aware, at least at this time of recording, that the data hasn't shown up anywhere on the dark web that's been reported publicly, that is kind of, I don't know if I want to say strange, but it is kind of strange. Normally when you're talking about something of this magnitude, you're going to find out pretty quickly. You're going to hear, oh, well, we really think it's this group or this person or whatever. Right. And the fact that nobody's claimed it and nobody's really said anything, it's a little strange. And I think right now, I honestly think a lot of people in financial sector, in the government and security sector, everybody's kind of sitting here going, okay, and waiting for the other shoe to drop and find out basically what's going to happen with the situation, because it's so messed up.
See, if I'm writing the novel about this, and I'm not a novelist, but I'm not a computer security guy either, or an information security guy either, so why not? If I'm writing the novel about this is either somebody that stumbled on something so big that they're afraid to say they did it, or it's a nation state.
Yeah. And that, I think either of those, you wouldn't want to be, if you were the one person who stumbled on this by accident, this is the thing that, gets you on the run, because the guys with guns are coming after you.
Right.
And what if there was more than one person? More than one group, more than one time that this information was accessed.
And that's something that's very true in security, is when you have flaws found in systems, a lot of times you'll have security researchers or even hackers will find that there's evidence that other people have also been poking around those same systems quietly. So unless you're talking about some really obscure 0-day that was exploited by a nation state, the chances are it's something, flaws are something that aren't necessarily super secret. It's, something that wasn't patched and more than one person's been in the system. Kind of throwing it out there, I heard that Shadow Brokers has lined up some new leaks for this fall that they're collecting their auction proceeds for, or whatever. They're going to, like when we had the ransomware attacks over the summer tied to some of the 0-days that were released by them. The question springs to mind, if this is some sort of 0-day, is it something that's going to be tied to an upcoming leak from Shadow Brokers this fall?
Do we know anything, by the way, about the security that Equifax was running? Because that tends to be a lot of what we talk about as well, is like sometimes, XYZ Corporation is going to have been running, Windows XL, or not Windows XL, but Windows XP, excuse me, or whatever they're called. I can't remember that. I've been in Mac for too long, but sometimes we find that, somebody was running an outdated operating system or an outmoded operating system. Do we know anything actually about the system that got hacked?
From what I've heard, and I've only heard a few things. I heard the first thing was that some of their websites, people went and analyzed them after the fact and was like, hey, this, and this are insecure on their sites. A white hat researcher came out and said that he reported a flaw to them last spring or something that was never patched, like still was not resolved as of when this breach happened. And then I believe recently some people were saying that there was a patch. I want to say it was Apache Struts. It was an open source project that had a 0-day that some people were trying to attribute to the hack, but I don't know if there was any concrete evidence there. So right now, a lot of guessing. Again, until we hear from Equifax or the security company that analyzed the situation, we probably won't know unless somebody leaks the information.
And then on the hardware level, I mean, there's security solutions that they're using just on the hardware level. There's speculation all across the board.
That is something, though, is the other question. Okay, was it something that they did wrong, like running out-of-date software or hardware or whatever? Or was it, was it an insider? Or was it a 0-day?
Misconfigured hardware.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, if we're assuming, let's just assume, give them the benefit of the doubt that they were running at least some security software. Unless it was a 0-day, that's also going to be a failure on the part of those security vendors to have, why didn't this attack get detected sooner than it did? I'm running amok for a month and a half in somebody's system is a pretty long time to go undetected. So, either they weren't running security software or the security software missed it for whatever reason, or it was a really, really, really advanced hack. And that's the thing.
Or a human missed it in the reporting of the hardware.
And a lot of this is a who knows situation.
Not to be paranoid about it, but again, writing the novel, you could also make it social engineering. Somebody's got something on somebody who's inside someplace, and one thing leads to another, leads to people having access. I mean, and I don't. That seems the least likely of all of it. And again, I'm just making up Hollywood stuff there. Except it seems to me that every question I ask comes back from you guys, and not blaming you because obviously the information's not all out there. But you're saying it could be this, it could be this, it could be this, it could be this, which basically means we still don't know.
Yeah.
All right.
That's
awesome.
exactly.
Well, one of my favorite things to do on this show, aside from freak people out apparently, is to give them an idea of the kind of thing that they can do going forward. I'm at a little bit of a loss on this one, but you tell me. I mean, should I be going to that site that Equifax has set up? Should I be signing up for credit monitoring with somebody else? What are the next steps for me as an individual who may or may not have had their information accessed?
Oh, okay. The good news is there are some things to do, actually recommended by the FTC for all American credit card holders or anybody who thinks they might be affected by this or any other breach. First of all, I would say until we find out what's going on with that whole terms and conditions clause on the lawsuit thing, there seems to be no real point in checking on that website right now, the Equifax2017.com, or I think it was Equifax Security 2017. There's no real point in checking right now until they actually let people know if the results that are coming back from that website are accurate or not. Because you're either going to get a false sense of security or you're going to get something that says, oh, okay, maybe you were affected, maybe not, who knows. There's no real point. There already is a $70 billion class action lawsuit that was filed against them today. Now, they're like a $17 billion company, so the numbers aren't going to match up there. But obviously, there's going to be some lawsuits coming from this. Obviously, this is going to affect a lot of people, and I actually think this is probably going to be a situation where if it's really that bad, where everybody's social security numbers are out there, the government is going to have to step in and figure something out. In the meantime, check your credit report. Everybody can do it for free once a year with annualcreditreport.com. That's recommended even when there aren't security breaches. It's a good idea to check your credit history, make sure that there's no accounts open. Mistakes do happen. So that's number one. Number two would be consider putting a credit freeze on your files. Basically,
Is that different than the PIN generation thing that Equifax got a whole bunch of
we'll
stuff
talk about
over?
that too. Yeah, no, that is. A credit freeze basically stops, it makes it harder for anybody else to open a new account under your name. It also makes it harder for you to open an account under your name or change your information. You get a PIN number. I think it costs like $10 for each of the credit bureaus. And you put a freeze on your account, and you can unfreeze it by entering this PIN number you get. And it's actually a really good security step that's been recommended by most of the experts here, more than anything else, more than setting up the fraud alerts and everything else. And unfortunately, I believe, was it Equifax that had the PINs generated were the year and date
based off the time and date.
Yeah, it was seriously. It was the time and date that you put the credit freeze on was your PIN. Yeah. Yeah, okay. I mean, and so that aside, that is right now one of the best recommendations. So, keeping track, monitoring your existing accounts, take a look at your bill every month to make sure there's no charges on your credit card that you don't recognize, or your bank. Another thing is a fraud alert. I believe those only last like 3 months. It's 90 days, and it will basically tell your bank and other places that you are at risk of being a victim of identity theft, and they should take a closer look at anybody who's trying to open a new account or change.
So, are they going to pre-populate that database for everybody now with the 143 million Americans?
There's bound to be some extra security there because of the fact that this is so huge. And then finally, the final recommendation from the FTC is basically making sure to file your taxes early, because with Social Security numbers in the mix here, tax fraud has been a growing threat over the years, where if somebody gets your Social Security number and they file a false tax claim in your name and get a refund or whatever, it can cause a big mess for you. So, making sure to stay on top of that going into 2018, doing that as soon as possible is another recommendation. So there are these concrete steps that you can take, and they're good steps taken. At least the credit freeze one is probably worth considering for most people. But again, the scale of this breach, the question is whether that's going to be enough. It's pretty mind-boggling, even for me as a security professional.
So are we going to see more like two-factor authentication stuff? When you open a credit card, you're going to get a ping to your telephone number where you have to supply that secondary code. Is there going to be some sort of implementation in the future to avoid this type of stuff? Because all the information's out there, so what do you do to try to stop it?
It's almost like biometrics is the next step.
Oh, and what about all those security questions? Because I remember applying for a loan for my car, and it asking me where I graduated from, or what street I lived on, or was that part of this whole breach?
Well, the interesting thing with those security questions are it's kind of a reverse security question. Instead of you providing the question, they're asking the question. They provide you choices, including the correct one. Sometimes they actually don't include the correct one. They say none of the above is one of the options. Yeah, and they'll populate it with information from your credit history. So where the county you grew up in, or where you registered a car, or whatever. And they'll put in some fake information too, and that is a security measure they take to try and stop fraud. But yeah, if that data is obviously part of your credit history, the real data, so that's a simple matter for the thieves to then use to answer those type of questions. Yeah, it's a huge mess. That's what it comes down to.
So if any of those security questions are used on any other website you've ever visited, and you supply that information, then time to change those as well. Make up your answers.
I think we recommended that a long time ago in one of the episodes.
We did.
I think it was actually Apple who recommended initially, was saying your answers don't necessarily have to match the question. What's your favorite color, Mozart? Yeah, it's not a bad idea.
That's true of the security question that you make up. But I mean, I've gone through credit checks in the past where it says, so which of these streets did you not live on?
Yep.
And I can't make up that answer. I mean, I can make up lots of streets that I haven't lived on, but I mean, when they're giving me four options,
they're giving you a specific choice,
right,
exactly,
and I'm supposed to pick one. It doesn't matter how many answers I make up. I mean, if they're coming to me with, the multiple choice, and I've got to choose, and now bad guys have that. See, we were supposed to end on good things that people can do. So let me tell people some other stuff that they can do instead. We covered a lot of stuff here. If you want to go back and go through any of it, we're going to have show notes up for this show. The place to find those show notes is securemac.com/checklist. That's where you'll find the show notes for today's episode and any past episodes and any episodes coming up in the future. Securemac.com/checklist. If you have a specific security question, or if you have a topic that you would like to hear us hit, because we're doing sort of more of these general security questions at this point. Obviously, when something big like the Equifax hack happens, or the Equifax data access breach happens, we're gonna sort of break our schedule and talk about that. But if you have a specific question that you'd like to ask or a topic you'd like to hear us hit, we do have an email address. It is checklist@securemac.com. That address again is checklist@securemac.com. And if you can't remember that, please do remember this. You are listening to The Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. And we'll talk to you next week.